Ethan Harper had always lived a simple life. His days were filled with the smell of fresh hay, the sound of cattle lowing in the fields, and the endless blue sky stretching over the Texas plains. He had a small ranch, a modest home, and a few close friends he trusted with his life. One of those friends had been Cole Mason. They had grown up together, riding horses, fixing fences, and sharing every dream a young rancher could have. Cole had been more than a friend. He was like a brother. Ethan remembered the first time he had met Lila. She was quiet and gentle, with soft brown eyes that seemed to see everything around her. She had married Cole when they were both very young, and over the years she had become part of the community. Always kind, always giving. Ethan had never thought of her in any way beyond friendship. But now, with Cole gone, everything felt different. The day Cole died, Ethan had felt a pain so deep, it was hard to breathe. It was during a rodeo accident, a moment of tragedy that none of them had seen coming. Ethan had rushed to the scene, but there was nothing he could do. He had stood by Lila, holding her hand as she cried, feeling helpless. The whole town seemed to grieve with them, and for a long time, Ethan had been too numb to even think about the future. A few weeks after the funeral, Ethan had gone to Cole's house to help Lila sort through papers and belongings. That was when he found the letter that changed everything. It was Cole's will. Ethan had read it several times, hoping that maybe he had misunderstood, but the words were clear. Cole had written that Ethan could inherit part of the land he had helped him manage. But there was one condition. Ethan had to marry Lila. At first, Ethan had felt anger and disbelief. How could Cole expect this? Was it really fair to Lila or to him? He had never considered marrying her, and he had his own life, his own dreams, and his own plans. But as he looked at the letter again, he saw the thought behind it. Cole wanted to make sure his family would be safe. He wanted Lila and the children to have a protector, someone they could rely on. And he trusted Ethan more than anyone else in the world. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He walked the fields of his ranch, feeling the cold wind on his face, thinking about what to do. He thought about his own dreams, his love for the land and the life he had built. But he also thought about Cole's children, two little ones who needed guidance and care. He thought about Lila, who was struggling to find her strength again. Ethan realized that this decision was bigger than him, bigger than his own desires. It was about loyalty, responsibility, and honor. Days passed, and Ethan tried to talk to Lila about the situation. She listened quietly, her eyes full of sadness and confusion. She didn't want to think about marriage so soon, and she certainly didn't want to feel like a prize or obligation. She loved Cole, and she still missed him terribly. Ethan could see the pain in her eyes, and it made him feel even more conflicted. He didn't want to hurt her, and yet he couldn't ignore the responsibility laid on him. As the weeks went by, Ethan tried to manage both ranches. He woke up before dawn, feeding the cattle, checking fences, and tending to the crops. Lila tried to help where she could, but she was still recovering from the loss, still trying to figure out how to move forward. The children were sweet but frightened, not understanding why their father was gone and why this man, who had always been a friend to their dad, was now expected to take his place. Ethan found himself exhausted. His body ached from work and his mind ached from worry. He missed his own simple life, the freedom to make decisions without thinking about someone else's needs. He missed the quiet evenings by the fire, reading or planning for the next season. Now every decision was about more than just him. It was about Lila, the children, the land, and the memory of his friend. Despite all this, Ethan tried to find moments of peace. He and Lila would sometimes sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. They didn't talk about marriage or inheritance. They talked about the little things, how the crops were doing, how the children were learning, how the town was changing. In those moments, Ethan saw the woman Lila was, not just the widow, but someone strong, gentle, and kind. It gave him a new kind of respect and admiration for her. But life had a way of testing him. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in. The sky darkened quickly and the wind howled through the trees. Ethan ran outside to secure the animals and check the fences. The rain was heavy, soaking him to the bone, and the wind threatened to knock him off his feet. He saw a tree fall near the barn and realized that the storm could destroy everything he had worked for. His heart pounded as he ran to protect the livestock, calling for Lila and the children to stay inside. By the time the storm passed, Ethan was exhausted, and the damage was clear. Fences were broken, part of the barn roof had collapsed, and some of the crops were ruined. He looked at the destruction and felt a sinking feeling in his chest. How could he manage both ranches in the midst of all this? How could he protect Lila and the children while also keeping his own land safe? The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavier than any storm. That night, Ethan sat by the fire thinking. He thought about Cole, about the promise he had made to himself long ago to always honor his friend. He thought about Lila and the children, about the trust Cole had placed in him, and he thought about his own dreams, his freedom, and his life that now felt so distant. He realized that sometimes doing the right thing came at a cost. Sometimes sacrifice was necessary, even if it meant losing what he had worked so hard for. Ethan didn't know what the future would hold. He didn't know if he would ever feel happiness again, or if he would ever be able to see the life he had dreamed of come true. But he did know one thing. He would do everything he could to honor his friend's memory, to protect Lila and the children, and to keep the land safe. That was more important than anything else. As he looked out at the dark fields, now quiet after the storm, Ethan made a silent promise to himself and to Cole. He would face whatever challenges came next. He would endure the hardship, the exhaustion, and the doubt, and he would do it with honesty and integrity, even if it meant losing everything he had known. In the days that followed, Ethan began to take small steps. He repaired fences, fixed the barn, and helped Lila and the children adjust to their new life. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of frustration and tears, but slowly a rhythm began to form. They were learning to live together, not as strangers or out of obligation, but as a family united by loyalty, grief, and the shared memory of a man they both had loved. Ethan often caught himself glancing at Lila in those moments, watching the way she smiled when the children laughed, or how she quietly tended to the animals. There was a gentleness to her, a resilience that reminded him why Cole had loved her so deeply. Ethan didn't know if love would ever grow between them, but he knew respect and trust were already there. And sometimes that was enough to keep going. He still felt the weight of the decision he had made, still felt the pull of the life he had sacrificed. But for now he focused on the present, on the family in front of him, and on honoring his friend's wishes. The future was uncertain, but Ethan had learned something important. Sometimes, doing the right thing wasn't about happiness or reward. It was about standing strong when the world demanded it most. And as the sun rose over the ranch the next morning, casting golden light across the fields, Ethan felt a small spark of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready to face it step by step with courage and determination. He didn't know what he would lose or gain along the way, but he knew that he would never stop trying to do what was right. The weeks turned into months, and life on the ranch settled into a new but still uneasy rhythm. Ethan had learned to manage both his own ranch and Cole's land, though it was never easy. Every morning he rose before the sun, checking fences, feeding the cattle, and inspecting the crops. Lila helped when she could, but she was still finding her place in this new reality. The children had begun to trust him more, though their smiles often hid confusion and longing for the father they had lost. Despite the routine, tension lingered between Ethan and Lila. She appreciated his effort and honesty, but she still felt hurt. Marriage for her had been something she had not wanted so soon. She often found herself avoiding conversations, her silence speaking volumes. Ethan could feel her distance, and it weighed heavily on him. He wanted to do the right thing to honor Cole's memory, but he also wanted Lila to see that he respected her grief and feelings. One afternoon, a neighbor came by with news that shook Ethan. A bank inspector had visited his ranch, noting that his financial situation was more precarious than they had realized. The damage from the storm had cost more than he had anticipated. If he didn't act quickly, he could lose the land he had fought so hard to protect. His stomach tightened as he thought about the children, about Lila, and about the promise he had made to Cole. Losing the ranch was not just about losing land. It would mean failing the family he had vowed to protect. Ethan spent long nights poring over finances, making difficult calculations and seeking advice from others in the community. He considered selling some of his own property, but even that would barely cover the losses. He began to feel trapped, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him harder than ever before. And yet he couldn't show weakness in front of Lila or the children. They needed stability, not doubt. Meanwhile, Lila's own emotions were becoming harder to manage. She loved her children fiercely and wanted to do what was best for them. But the pressure of the ranch, the marriage, and her own grief was overwhelming. She often stayed up late, sitting by the window, staring into the night and wondering if she had made the right choice in accepting Ethan's help. Sometimes she caught herself wishing she could turn back time, wishing Cole was still there to guide them. Despite the struggles, there were moments of connection. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Ethan and Lila found themselves sitting on the porch, the children asleep inside. The air was cool and the stars twinkled above the wide-open fields. Neither of them spoke at first, both lost in their thoughts. Then Ethan broke the silence. "I know this isn't what you wanted," he said quietly. "I never wanted to hurt you, Lila. I only wanted to do what Cole would have wanted." Lila looked at him, her eyes soft but tired. "I know, Ethan, I see that. And I'm grateful. But I also need to feel something real, not just duty or obligation. I need to know that we can live, not just survive." Ethan nodded, understanding her words more deeply than she could know. He had been so focused on responsibility that he had forgotten to consider their emotional well-being. He realized that protecting them meant more than guarding land and livestock. It meant being present, being patient and showing kindness even in the smallest ways. Days later, a financial setback pushed Ethan to the brink. Some of the cattle had fallen ill after the storm, and the cost of treatment threatened to wipe out his savings. He worked tirelessly, caring for the animals, calling veterinarians, and seeking advice from neighbors. The children watched him, learning the meaning of hard work, resilience, and dedication. Lila, seeing his unwavering commitment, began to see a side of Ethan she had never noticed before. A quiet strength, a determination that came from the heart, not just from duty. Despite the hardships, the family began to adapt. The children laughed more, trusting Ethan a little more each day. Lila started participating in ranch work, helping feed the animals and organize daily chores. Slowly, the home became less tense and more like a family again. The love they shared for Cole was still there, but it was beginning to shift into a bond of trust and care among themselves. Ethan's heart, however, was still heavy with loss. He missed his old life, the freedom he had once known. He missed moments of quiet without responsibility pressing down on him. There were times when he questioned whether he had made the right choice, whether the sacrifices were too great. But every time he saw the children smile or Lila laugh, he remembered why he had made them. He remembered Cole, and he remembered the promise he had made to honor his friend's memory. One particularly difficult evening, tensions reached a breaking point. A disagreement over how to handle the remaining storm damage escalated. Lila's frustration boiled over, and she shouted in anger and exhaustion. Ethan, feeling the pressure and fatigue, responded with equal intensity. The argument left both of them silent, sitting in separate corners of the house, hearts pounding and emotions raw. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He walked outside, letting the cool night air clear his mind. He thought about Cole, about his own dreams, about Lila, and about the children. He realized that he couldn't continue like this, holding everything inside and expecting perfection from himself and from her. He had to be honest, even if it was difficult. The next morning, he approached Lila with a calm he had not felt in weeks. "We need to talk," he said. They sat on the porch again, the morning sun warming the fields around them. "I need to be honest with you. I married you because of Cole, because I promised him I would take care of you and the children. I didn't do it for myself, and I think you need to know that." Lila's eyes filled with tears, not of anger but of relief. She had felt the truth in his words for some time, and hearing it aloud lifted a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. I understand," she said softly. "And I appreciate your honesty. I needed to hear that. Maybe now we can figure out what comes next, together." From that moment, a shift occurred. They began to work as a true team, not bound by obligation but by respect and understanding. Ethan taught Lila how to manage some of the ranch work more efficiently. Lila showed Ethan the joy in small moments, cooking meals together, listening to the children's stories, and simply sitting quietly, sharing the weight of the day. Financial difficulties still existed, but they faced them together, making decisions as a unit rather than individually. The town noticed their cooperation and supported them where they could, offering advice, helping with labor, or lending tools. Ethan realized that asking for help didn't make him weak. It made him smarter and more resilient. Slowly, the bond between Ethan and Lila grew, not as lovers at first, but as partners. They began to enjoy each other's company, sharing laughs over small mistakes and celebrating successes together. Lila started to see that Ethan's devotion was real, not just out of duty. Ethan, in turn, saw Lila's strength and compassion as a guiding light, helping him navigate a world that had once seemed overwhelming. Even the children began to call Ethan Dad in their small, innocent ways. It wasn't forced, and it didn't happen overnight, but with each passing day, trust deepened and family ties strengthened. Ethan learned that love didn't always start with a spark. It could grow quietly, steadily, through respect, care, and shared experiences. As the seasons changed, the ranch began to recover. Fences were rebuilt, crops replanted, and the cattle grew strong again. Ethan still worked tirelessly, but he no longer felt the crushing weight of isolation. He had a family, a purpose, and a sense of fulfillment he hadn't expected. Lila, too, began to embrace this new chapter, balancing her grief for Cole with gratitude for the support and honesty Ethan provided. Ethan often reflected on the journey. He had lost parts of his old life, freedom, simplicity, and the ease he once knew. But he had gained something far more meaningful: trust, integrity, and a bond that could not be broken by hardship. He had learned that true strength wasn't in holding everything alone, but in standing together and facing challenges with honesty, courage, and patience. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, Ethan and Lila stood together, watching the sky turn gold and pink. The children played nearby, laughing and shouting, full of life and hope. Ethan felt a quiet sense of peace. He had faced impossible choices, endured hardship, and honored his friend's memory. And though he had lost some things, he had gained a family, a home, and a new kind of happiness. Ethan realized that life didn't always follow the plans we make. Sometimes it demanded sacrifice, patience, and strength, but it also offered unexpected rewards: love that grew slowly, trust that was earned, and joy that came from standing together through the storms. And so, as the first stars appeared in the sky, Ethan knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with courage. He had lost much, but he had not lost the heart and the values that defined him. He had found a new kind of life, built not on obligation alone, but on respect, care, and the quiet, enduring power of love and loyalty.